There's something like in the as you said about the reality they were like I think you were even before podcast we were talking about psychedelics and kind of when somebody kind of takes something like this the experiences were like they experience like more of the reality, more of the consciousness or something like this. And we're talking about you can kind of achieve the same thing even with something you're doing with somatic therapy and kind of how it connects and those a lot of different realms about it. So maybe like yeah, talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, a good metaphor is that look, psychedelics are kind of like a really big hammer, right? You can open a door with a key, or you could open a door with a hammer. Either way, you're going to get the job done. Psychedelics just do a lot of things all at once, based off of how they function on a chemical level and also like at a, I'll say, a spiritual exchange level. It's a type of consciousness you're interacting with. But it's not necessary to get to those same places. For example, I'll use a very small piece of what psychedelics opens up. Psychedelics can help purge repressed memories from childhood, right? Many people will go through a somatic therapy session and take a dose of psychedelics, and suddenly they're recalling things from when they were in the womb, right? When they're in their mother's womb. That's incredibly difficult to recall, but it is possible. The psychedelics just facilitate the opening of the places in the mind where that's stored. And then it allows the body freedom and the lack of resistance to allow that thing to come out and to be acted out, right? Sometimes there's like postural things that needed to happen in the womb to align the skeleton or to regulate the hormones that didn't happen, that shaped a person's body over time. And when they're later in adulthood in a psychedelic integration session, they realized that the psychedelic was helping them act out that memory from the womb that never happened. So psychedelics do a lot of things all at once, but that mechanism can be worked on differently. I can give a person a series of exercises because I see how that memory has changed their mind's perception of the world, what they think about, how they think, their personality traits. Do they look for social acceptance? Are they more reserved? And I can tell that their heart really has a hard time connecting to the world. Those are all like behavioral things. But for me to be able to see that, it means that it's affecting their body because I can see it in their body. So maybe posturally they've been stuck like up here for years and they're barely breathing and they have this really like scared look in their eyes all the time. Well, you can change that. You can work through the tensions that are unresolved that are causing this permanent holding pattern. And suddenly when the tissue starts to move better, it will allow itself to act out the action that never fully happened, and then it can relax. When you get really, really deep into somatic therapies, one of the things you'll notice is that sometimes people's faces will change over the years. Their facial posture, because they're no longer squeezing themselves into certain mental challenges anymore, can relax and the facial structure and expression will change, showing more of their heart through their face. Easy way to see this is like everyone knows what a really, really depressed person looks like who doesn't have a lot of emotional range. Their face is very unexpressed. That's, if I was painting a painting, that's like painting a painting with maybe two colors. The fact that even their body can't access more aspects of reality tells me there's something that needs to be loosened and opened up. Psychedelics do that en masse, like they do it all at once. They work on a lot of different dimensions, but each of those dimensions can be worked on individually. And there are realms of research that you can go into academically to figure out how to work on that.
Interesting, interesting. Uh, yeah, well, especially with psychedelics is really interesting because when I'm hearing about these experiences, it's always like so crazy. Like people can't even kind of comprehend it in their own words. Like it's undescribable. And I wanted to know if like you experienced something like it, like that, or if if you even can kind of I think more about it than most people do. So if you kind of can say something about it, and what was that like, or kind of, and why, if you were in that realm, why do you now prefer more somatic therapy?
I'll answer that last question first, and then I'll go back to giving you guys a little bit of a story, a number of stories. I was never really a substance person. Like growing up, I was very regimented by the books. I grew up in a government town where everyone kind of goes to school, gets a government job, and is very narrow. They don't experience a wide scope of reality. So I was never really a fan of altered states of consciousness when I was younger. I would much prefer sports and willpower and studying like things like Buddhism and athletics and diet to get the body to change and rehabilitate. When I finished studying with my psychotherapy mentor and he had passed, sorry, the screen just went dark here. I think there we go. You still there?
Yeah.
Okay, my screen just went completely dark. Okay. When he had passed and the pandemic had hit, I was in the middle of joining different men's groups and doing some research and decided to go into other realms of reality that he hadn't talked about as much. A lot of psychotherapists do work with psychedelics, even in secret in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but that wasn't part of his training. So I went and pursued that for a number of years, and it just continued everything that we had already been doing. All the work that we had done in somatic therapy was actually very, very similar to the experiences of being on psychedelics. For example, one of my breaking points in therapy, we were at a workshop with my mentor, and he was able to work on me on day 4 and broke an aspect of my character structure. Some of the restraints of how I had shaped and morphed myself since childhood were broken instantaneously during this workshop. And what it looked like to break that was psychosis. Exercise induced, though, we used a series of exercises to break the muscular armoring patterns such that the life force in my body could move differently. And in that movement process, my body was flailing spontaneously, uncontrolled, as if something else was taking over my body. And my mind, while I was not with my body completely, was playing a lot of other memories that I had forgotten about. And as those memories would land finally, and I would remember them, it would force my body to act out something else I had forgotten from like childhood, or from when I was in the womb, or when I was 2, or something that I never even knew happened, or that I needed to process. That's exactly what happens on psychedelics, amongst other things. So, to answer your other question, psychedelics can be a wide scope of experiences. There are all kinds of different psychedelics, and they all have their own very unique feeling. It's kind of like watching different types of movies. One director might direct the exact same movie, but he has a totally different style. So even if you have a similar journey, but you're on a different medicine, it will feel a little bit different. My first journey was with the strongest psychedelic on the planet. So I didn't fully know what I was getting into. I had a friend who was in my men's group at the time who worked in psychedelic assisted therapy and had studied with a number of shamans over the years, so he offered to facilitate a ceremony for me. 3 doses each day of the strongest psychedelic on the planet, 3 days in a row. That was plenty. That's a lot of journeying in one day, let alone doing that 3 times in a row. The places that I went to keep this short on some of those first journeys, were going through the different stages of human development. I remember feeling like I was in my mother's womb, and I kept exiting the birth canal. I could feel, literally, myself passing through the vaginal canal over and over and over again, as if I was like touching my own skin. And then the visual would change, or the experience in my body would change, and I was moving through the stages of evolutionary development. I was a pterodactyl in one of the very first, I could feel, rather than having hands, that my arm had become this large hand with a wing on it, and I was flying above the ground. And then that would switch, and I was a rodent, and then I could feel the cells changing in my body and reorganizing as evolution changed different species over time. There are many, many experiences like this of different kinds. They're not all as fantastical as that, like I'm interacting with an alien of some sort or a being, or I'm literally changing bodies. Sometimes it's as simple as, wow, I'm really feeling my skin for the first time in my life in a way that I've forgotten since I was a child. You know, the older you get, the less sensitive you tend to be. So psychedelics is a great way to kind of regain some of the sensitivity of childhood also. So it does a bunch of different things, but those are kind of like, you know, moments that most people want to hear about because they're like, oh my God, I can't wait to experience that. I would warn you, to get to that point, it was not very enjoyable. The feeling on that first journey with that level of medicine in my body, and because of how I was built, not everybody experiences this, but to break through to the other side and no longer be in this dimension meant that my ego had to lose touch with reality. It had to have a temporary ego death. That feeling felt like every sensation that I had that connected me to this body, every thought about Logan or my life or a person or a memory, anytime it would pop into my mind, it felt like my body was being physically ripped apart, as if someone was tearing a limb off. So like those can also be very much part of the experience of what ego death is like if there's a lot of resistance to opening yourself in that way. So as much as people are very excited to explore those things, I would caution, know what you're getting into and start very progressively, rather than going for the strongest psychedelic right away.
Yeah, for sure. I don't want to try, but like it's so interesting hearing about it and even talking about it. And well, like one of my questions was even what many people are talking about the ego death, and that it is something that it's not very enjoyable, as many people kind of may present it, So yeah, it's so interesting, honestly.
It can be. It depends on who you are as a person and how ready you are to live in that dimension. You know, a lot of the people that I see in the circles out here in Vancouver who do really well with that kind of stuff are already living disconnected from this dimension. I think of people who are very, very emaciated. They're always kind of hippy-dippy, taking psychedelics all the time, doing breath work. They're typically also geared towards being more vegan or vegetarian, which does remove you from the connection with the body to some degree. There's just less of you here, the smaller you get, and the less sensations there are. So you have to orient to some dimension where there's a lot of data, so they go elsewhere. So they're already straddling another dimension on a regular basis. So for them, ego death can often feel a lot more enjoyable. Like it can feel quite blissful. You think about this, most people will talk about psychedelics sometimes, and ego death can feel like, well, like an orgasm. In French, there is this saying, you know, an orgasm also is talked about as la petite mort, which is to say the small death. So sex is another place that brings people to these altered states where the ego can dissolve and you return to the ocean of connection, which is why sex can really connect you to someone as much as psychedelics or as deep, deep meditation. These are all just different ways to get back to returning to source. And if you do that with a person, that's also extremely powerful. I think people can get very attached to any one of these options, excessively so. So, you know, be mindful.
Yeah, I've heard there was this article about something that many people, while they are taking even psychedelics, some it stops working for them at all. Like they were kind of getting in this realm of something. They were in this room here and there, and then it just doesn't work for them. They're kind of getting kicked out or something. And have you heard about this, or is it just something you know?
So I've heard of different levels of that experience where some are very, very personal, such as like they encounter an entity that kicks them out of that dimension, or there's a presence. Sometimes it's either the medicine itself as a consciousness. You know, I think of like ayahuasca being a very discernible one where a lot of people experience her. They refer to the medicine as a female because there's a dialogue that seems to be constantly the same no matter who takes it. Ayahuasca always seems to be a very feminine influence. So those consciousnesses of the plant or substance or animal that you're taking can interact with you, and it can also assess whether or not you're ready to continue relating to it. Just like a relationship. If a person doesn't like me and doesn't want to talk to me, then they would tell me go away, right? If I'm incapable of respecting the thing in front of me, which is to say that I'm open and receiving of whatever it wants to give me, and I'm willing to dialogue back and forth, really being present with a person or a medicine, wanting to hear what she or he has to say, actually letting it land, all of those things tell me that I'm ready to be here. If a substance, an animal, a plant, a person perceives that you're not there, it's not going to keep interacting with you. So there's one layer right there. There's the plant itself or the animal itself refusing to let you into that dimension. There's also what's called a null experience. Sometimes you'll call this either a blackout or a whiteout, where someone will just see white for the entire journey. They'll disappear, they'll forget entirely what happened, there's no experience, it's almost like they're in a white room and nothing's happening. And then they come back and nothing happened. That is often a boundary. The ego is going, this experience is going to be too much for me, so I'm going to turn off the electricity. And if I'm watching TV, or nowadays if you're looking at something on your phone, and your parents don't want you to continue watching, they will turn off the device, right? Or they'll power it off, or they'll close it in some way. The ego can do the same thing because it feels like this is going to be too much to digest, so it will white out the experience or it will black it out, and you'll come to after the medicine has been metabolized and you'll not know what happened. Option 3 is what you're talking about. That's where you're interacting with another entity that lives in that dimension that the medicine opened you up to. And often those entities can be, there's all kinds in different dimensions, just like there are humans in this dimension, but there's also squirrels and butterflies and other things. Well, those other dimensions have a variety of other beings or consciousness types there. Some of them kind of interact with you benevolently. And they often are the safeguards of, okay, well, you're not welcome in this dimension. You keep skipping over important things in your life, and you're using the medicine to avoid something. So let's put you back in the 3D dimension, the physical dimension, because that's where the most relevant lessons are for you. So stop taking the psychedelic. You're not allowed to have any more progress over here before you do the groundwork over here in this dimension.